Okay, welcome everybody. I think I've got this right now. I think I just was talking with the audio switched off, but anyway, okay, I think the audio's on. Hopefully in the next few minutes, if you can't hear me, people will start putting in the chat that they can't hear me. But speaking of which, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat facility here, and we'll be sure to pick them up at the end of the session. Today's session is educational, and we're going to be focusing on security in Oracle Cloud, ERP, HCM, or SaaS applications or Fusion applications. This is not PeopleSoft or EBS that are hosted in the cloud. These are the applications that Oracle is providing in the cloud already. I hope that clears that up, because sometimes people come along to these things and they say, oh, I was expecting to learn about EBS. So this is for those particular applications. Just a bit of an introduction. So Securing is a organization based here in the US, in Texas, and we built the company on the premise of trying to solve certain key issues that we've been seeing in the marketplace since the early 2000s, and really to help organizations not only identify issues in security, but actually to go some way toward fixing them. Okay, and to do that is to try and simplify security, to simplify the volume into something that anyone can really understand, and anyone can make informed decisions as to what the best process is, what's the best step forward. Okay, so we are a software and a service provider. Okay, we build software, we work with partners to create solutions that are software and service. Okay, and what I mean by that is, to give you a use case, we will analyze security. We will use software to find answers, to find recommendations, to manage the project of fixing the security. But we also work with CPAs and risk assessors to create content, to create best practices, and to create teams of individuals who can help and assist organizations with actually fixing the issues. Traditionally, GRC software has focused on telling you what the problems are. Here's a huge report of all the access points in your application, and here are all your problems. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Okay, and customers look at that and they go, okay, that's great. We've got the report. And then somebody says, now what? And working with some organizations, one in particular, going back a few years ago, a fairly small hospital spent 2 years taking those reports and slowly working through them to get the issues fixed. And in the meantime, the controller and the CFO is going crazy because nothing's moving forward, because there's, people have got jobs and there's no subject matter experts to help, and so forth and so on. So we've identified over the last, like I say, since the early 2000s, that there's this real problem of getting a report is really part one. From then, what do you do about it? And that's really where everything falls down a hole. And that's what we're trying to solve with our solutions. And as I say, we believe that software is not the magic bullet. There is a combination of software and services that used together create the solution. So what that consists of, we have tools for role design, patch impact analysis, configuration analysis, and access analysis within that segregation of duties and so on. Okay, so we have a range of solutions to help with anything from security design down to what are the impacts of patches, and what's changed in our configuration of the application. Now, my name is Lewis Hopkins, and I've been working with Oracle applications since 2003. Started off in JD Edwards, PeopleSoft, NetSuite, EBS. I've called it SaaS Cloud in this slide. Maybe we can change the name a few more times in this presentation to confuse people. But as I say, I've been working with these applications since three. I have to say, out of all of them, that from a security design perspective, JD Edwards was by far the worst. And probably NetSuite and EBS and PeopleSoft were probably less complicated than JD Edwards, but still have had a lot of nuances and issues. By far the easiest to work with so far has been NetSuite. NetSuite has some great controls built into the application out of the box, such as being able to apply two-factor authentication to roles, so that, you know, if a user gets that role, they have to use two-factor authentication to get into the app. So NetSuite has some nice features for security, but nonetheless, all of them still suffer from the same issues, some of which we'll cover today for Fusion SaaS applications. So let's talk about Fusion SaaS for today. Start at the basics. And this is for those of you who are not perhaps familiar with the structure. So in the application, you have the ability to create a number of different role types. Okay, at the top, arguably, is the abstract role, and the abstract role is a role that you'd have kind of regardless of job, but is something you do in the organization. So, for example, employee. Okay. So I'm an employee of the company. That comes before what my job is. And as an employee, that might allow me to have access to the application itself and that kind of thing. Then you have a job role, which, as you might imagine, would correspond to the job that I'm doing. And then within that, you would configure duty roles that start to get down to the more granular duties that I might perform on a daily basis. So if I'm, if I'm in sales, one duty role could be entering a sales order. The other one could be approving, for example. And then down at the foundation level, we have something called a privilege. This is similar to a program in JD Edwards or a component and page in PeopleSoft. I forget the term in EBS, and a permission in NetSuite. So it is like the page level access that gives you the ability to do something like enter a sales order. Okay, and there are a bunch of other privileges in there as well. They basically control your ability to kind of do anything in the application. Okay, and tied to all of this, just like all the other applications, you do have data security. Data security in Oracle Cloud, I'm not going to cover too much of that today, works really nicely. In EBS and PeopleSoft, you had a lot of constriction, a lot of limitation around what you could do with data security without applying customizations. And you certainly couldn't get the kind of context that you can get with Oracle Cloud applications. What I mean by that is in cloud, when you assign roles to users, you can assign data security to the role to say, okay, for company A, for example, I can do sales orders, and company B, I can do purchase orders. And so you can start to have this setup where I'm accessing privileges related to a role that has data security. I'm being restricted to that data at that point. Okay. Certainly in JD Edwards, there were complications whereby you could be assigned to a role, but that didn't necessarily mean you got the data security as well. And in PeopleSoft, you would have an issue where your data security or row security is actually kind of concatenated. It's all jumbled together. And from an admin point of view, what is it that my users are getting access to? What is the data I'm getting? Because it's kind of all being jumbled together into one messy lump. And so Oracle Cloud applications in that degree are much simpler to work with in that respect, much easier to work with. And you really do get an idea of what data security you're setting up because it is assigned to the actual role level. Okay, so within the application, you have something called the security console. For those of you who are security administrators, this is kind of where you would spend most of your time. And as you can see on the left-hand side, you have the option of working with roles, users, analytics. I'll come on to that in a bit. Certificates, which is around your keys. User categories, which is it's fairly basic process of allowing you to categorize users. It's fairly useful, but not overly effective in our compliance reporting. Single sign-on, and which fairly self-explanatory, and of course administration. You have the opportunity of creating roles, and one kind of first gotcha to get you here is when you're creating roles, you have two kind of core labels that you have to create, or rather three. First is a role code, and that is unique. Okay. And then you have a role name, which is not unique. And so that, having worked with a few customers already, that can be incredibly frustrating when it comes to reporting, because you can have role names that are the same as each other. And so that's something you have to watch out for. You do have to encompass in your reports, which we'll come on to, the actual role code, because that's unique. And hopefully the role description is unique unless it's been copied. But one thing to just bear in mind is when you're actually giving labels to the role, when you're giving a role name, you should try and keep them distinct. But unfortunately, you don't have that validation that says, oh, you can't save this because you're creating a duplicate role. You only get that on the role code itself. One of the other nice features in cloud is if you are a more visual person, you have the option of looking at your role structure diagrammatically. So what we have here is the accounts payable invoice supervisor role. And that role is the circle with the S in the middle. And then around, the arrows going out are pointing to, the other elements that this role has access to. So you'll see the purple there is the privilege, and the sort of other pink S's are the other roles. And then you'll see arrows coming off them. So we can kind of zoom in on those outer circles and see what they have attached to them. So again, I think, talking to Oracle, there was a lot of desire by customers to have a more visual approach over the roles, which were historically kind of columnar, list-based, and could be, fairly onerous to kind of wade through. So at least with this, you have a more visual way of working through. And you'll also see on the left there what I was saying about the name, the code, and the description. Those are the kind of three core areas of the role itself that you need to consider. The other thing to mention at this point is that we are looking at something called a seeded role here, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more as we go forward. I know that because the code begins with ORA. One of the kind of first recommendations to make in today is that we do recommend you come up with your own 3-code short code, right? ORA, or perhaps your company name, organization name, shortened to 3 characters, so that all new roles are created to distinguish themselves from, roles that are provided by Oracle, roles that might be set up and provided for third-party integrations, that kind of thing. But to try and come up with your own consistent naming convention, it will really help you out when it comes to reporting, for sure. There's also some basic analytics in the console. It's sadly, like the pie chart you can see here, you can't kind of click on it and drill down. You can't drill down on the left. It's just kind of, I guess, piquing curiosity. How many administrator roles do we have? How many aggregate privileges? It's fairly basic. The key to reporting is that there are a couple of pre-defined reports that Oracle make available, and I always get they have quite long names, but there's a user role membership report and a role audit report. I can't remember its full name. And these reports can be fairly big in size, very, very technical, because they give you all the detail, the role hierarchy in a very long column and so on. Very hard to work with, very hard to decipher. And just as importantly, we've actually found that these reports actually miss out certain roles in the system. And the fact is actually these are system-based roles that it misses out. Okay, so there's certain fusion roles that are embedded into the application that these reports miss out, we found. So the actual reporting that's delivered in the application is quite complex. So it doesn't help solve the security complexity issue of making it simplified. And B, actually misses out a lot of information. Okay. To come back to that point about complexity, we're at, I think, release 20B at the moment. And as I mentioned before, we do patch impact analysis. And in that, what we're finding is there's just shy of about 9,000 privileges available to you in the application. And the issue with the application is that these privileges may belong to modules that you're not licensed for. Okay. And you may or may not be familiar with this from the on-prem apps, but the thing you've got to be aware of is if your security administrators start granting access to privileges that you're not licensed for, and or assigning users to roles that have privileges that give you access to things you're not licensed for, you have to be careful, because of course, if at some point the organization starts using that functionality, assuming it's got to be configured, of course, you may or may not be aware of the impact to your licenses. There's no warnings that pop up and say, hey, you're trying to use something that you're not licensed for. Okay. In the same vein, that when it comes to creating users, and particularly assigning them to people, employees, suppliers, or otherwise, there is no warning to say, hey, you're going to go over your license count. Okay, that's something you really need to be aware of. So if you're a security admin, have a discussion with your team and say, okay, we need to figure out a process whereby, either monthly or quarterly, we're reporting on the number of users that we have and what they're using, what modules we're using. Are we in compliance with our license? Or if you're not in security admin, you need to go and have that discussion with your security admin to say, hey, we need to have a report that shows us what we're using. Okay. We're already seeing customers having this struggle because they're getting audited and they just themselves have not kept that visibility over their usage. And for a few, they've been a little bit way over their license count, unfortunately. So there are some steps you can take to help yourselves in terms of maintaining your composure and your compliance with Oracle licensing. Okay, so let's talk about seeded roles or delivered roles. If you're coming from any of the on-prem apps, they all pretty much have them. And I'm sure by now, if you're coming from those on-prem apps, you'll be aware of the downsides. Unfortunately, those downsides don't go away in Oracle Cloud. Okay. Some examples in cloud, we have application implementation consultant, IT security manager. I was going to mention another one then, but then realized that one's in NetSuite, so I'll try not to get my applications crossed over. But there are delivered roles that get you up and running with the application. And of course, usual benefits, security in a box, assign it to users, let's get going, keep that implementation on time, keep it, make it fast, make it cheap. But as with these things, if it's fast and cheap, it's not necessarily good. So first and foremost, the big thing to be aware of is that when Oracle brings out new releases, like I say, we're at 20B, and I'm not sure when 20C is out, but when that comes out, if it's not out already, what will happen is if you're using seeded roles, Oracle, when they apply that patch, that update to your environment, they have kind of assigned new functionality to the delivered seeded roles. So what that means is if I'm a new customer, and I'm rolling out cloud, I get that new functionality. I'm always on the latest release. But for you guys who are already on it and are using seeded roles, you're getting this new functionality whether you like it or not. And if you don't test it, and if you don't look at it in a non-prod environment, when you go to prod, that new functionality is going to go in. Now, on the inverse side, what we've seen in our analysis with a couple of customers, for example, between 20A and 20B, is that in 20B, it lost functionality that was there in 20A. So we're actually also seeing the inverse effect, which is that privileges are being deprecated. Okay, so that's another consideration. Overall, the idea is take into account the fact that if you're using seeded roles and you're not making changes to them, Oracle are making changes for you on your behalf. And the question is, what is that new functionality? And from a security perspective, what risk are we introducing into our environment? Okay. So it's a really, really important consideration. We're seeing more and more customers get in touch to say, we need to get a handle on our releases. Now we'll come on to the argument about seeded roles a little bit later, but overall, of course, if you're in security, you do have to be aware of what's coming in and what's new. And if the organization wants to start using that new functionality, what risks is it bringing into our organization? You have to have a better handle on that process. So this is what we found from our seeded roles. Now, I do want to give a shout out to a partner of securing, ERP Risk Advisors, who we've been working together with very closely on this work, who have helped put together these slides for today. This is part of the whole series. Running this webinar again next week, going to be running it with the Oracle user group. There's a lot of things that we're finding in delivered functionality in Oracle that as a security practitioner, you have to be aware of. So some end user roles contain configurations. And this is something that we've been kind of talking again to customers about currently, which is that, when we think about things like segregation of duties, we're always kind of fixed on transactions. And not enough attention gets paid to configurations, the ability to configure or change the configuration of the application, and then also do transactions, which is a bad idea. But if we're giving end users access to functionality that we think is transaction based, you should be aware that certain seeded roles also contain the ability to maintain configurations. We found that segregation of duty conflicts are inherent. So a lot of the roles give users the ability to create and maintain a transaction and then approve it, unless you then do some kind of customization or you're working on work lists or workflows. That's something you've got to be aware of. A lot of roles contain sensitive access risks. So by that, what we mean is perhaps the role gives you access to bank accounts, right? So forget what else it can do. It can just, it can give me access to bank, which in and of itself is a sensitive access that, I need to be aware. Do we need 20 people who can, update the bank account or what have you? So, so that's something that, that you need to be aware of. And again, roles are updated automatically during updates. So here's some examples. The role names are down the bottom here. Again, application implementation consultant. I'll talk about that role and those types of roles a little bit later on in more detail. But in this example, implementation roles have the ability to convert data across the board and use for hypercare and support. And this is the list here. If you want to kind of get into roles, which roles and so on, get in touch with us after. I'll leave the contact details up. But there are these implementation roles, which, as we'll see, create a lot of havoc if you leave them in. Administer flex fields. Found that across receivables, asset, cash management, HR, order management projects, supplier roles. So the ability to administer flex fields is found extensively across the application. Excuse me. I just had to cough. So another key area to stay on top of, employee attributes, especially yesterday, California's CCPA regulation went into effect. They're not holding back on enforcing on that. If you're not familiar with that, that's California's Consumer Privacy Act, which is a little bit like GDPR, really forcing organizations to take accountability of their data, who's accessing it, how's it stored, what are we doing with it. As I say, taking responsibility and accountability for data and how it's used. And so organizations need to be aware, of course, in ERP applications, not only who has access to data from a financial fraud error issue, but also compliance with data regulations now. So there are 29 roles where employee attributes influence workflow design. So again, another key area to keep an eye on. One of those, of course, is the internal auditor. Why does an internal auditor need to maintain employee attributes? So again, another kind of point about these seeded roles is sometimes they're not doing what you might think. Another one here, the ability to import. There are 73 roles where you have the ability to import suppliers and approve requisitions. Perhaps for another time, we'll get into configurations in cloud and look at some of the risks on an individual level and basis. But the Oracle Cloud Applications has a very good piece of functionality for importing and exporting data. And it's something that you really should take account of, because in certain circumstances, you can import data that bypasses the workflow approval routine. Okay. And again, if you want to know more detail about what those are, get in touch with Ian. Perhaps we'll run another session on that later about configurations in more detail. But 73 roles, there's a lot of roles that can import approve requisitions on the supplier side. In this one, we found 29 roles that can override supplier bank account data. Okay, so 5 in AP, 1's in the employee, 6 in HCM, 4 in implementation, 10 is supply chain, and 3 in tax. So again, seeded roles are covering a lot of ground, very broad access to the application that you need to be aware of. Okay, so I'm going to come on to roles best practices a little bit later on. Another area to consider if you're in security administration, or if you're looking at the application from a risk perspective, I've talked so far about the security console and as being the central place to manage security. There's a few caveats, and one I'm going to talk about is role delegations. And that is where we want the ability for a user to assign a role to another user and essentially bypass the user provisioning process. Okay. So in Oracle Cloud, and I'll show you a little bit more as we go through the slides, you have the ability to allow users to assign a role to another user, and that makes the role available for delegation. Okay. Now the issue is that when you set this delegation flag, it's a little bit misleading. You think you're setting it for the user that you're looking at, but actually what you're doing is you're setting it for all users. Okay. See if I have the screenshot here. So this is one of my users in our environment. And you can see here, we've got the role name, and there's that all important role code, and you'll see, is it assignable and is it auto provisioned? Okay. Now, as of 20B, in order to get to this and look at it, there's another option in your menu called Roles and Delegations. And it's available in seeded roles, Human Resource Manager, Contingent Worker, and Employee. Okay, so a fairly powerful piece of functionality available to some fairly basic standardized roles. So in the role delegations, this is what it looks like. You have your user, which is you. This is me in this case. You can see the role requests. You can see current roles. And then as you get to the bottom, you can see roles and approvals delegated to others. Okay, so in here, I can take a role name. I can put an end date in, so I can do effective dating, but then I can delegate it to other users. So now I'm outside of the security console, and I'm effectively empowered as an end user to start being involved in the role provisioning process, bypassing all the other controls that you have in place. Okay. Now, you have to be a genius to work out it's a bad idea, and we leave it to you to figure out whether this is something that what you want to use. But if you're not aware of this, you should be. And now it gives you the opportunity to put in place a control around this piece of functionality. So I'll just come back a little bit before. As I say, when you open up the navigator, it's under me, assuming, of course, you have one of these three roles, or if you've gone and created a custom role and added this, you're looking for roles and delegations. Then once you're in, you're looking at, in this case, me, okay, because it's under my menu. And you've got role requests, current roles, and as I say at the bottom, you've got that opportunity to delegate the role to other people, okay? And what that now sets in the role header is that this role is available for delegation. Now, there isn't a out-of-the-box report for this. You can't get an out-of-the-box report that shows you what these roles are, okay? But there is a OTBI, Oracle Transaction Business Intelligence report. If you're not familiar with that, BI kind of comes with the applications now. Very powerful tool for reporting, but you have to know where to look in the table structure and the views and so on in order to create your own reports. We've done that. We have a report available. And again, perhaps for another session, we'll talk about OTBI. That would be a good session. But we have a report available that will show you all the roles that have been made available for delegation. If whether you talk to us about one or you build your own, very important thing to have. It's something you should keep tabs on, in addition to keeping tabs on whether this functionality is secured or not. Because like I say, if you open it up, you're opening up your security provisioning process beyond the security console. And I know that's going to make a lot of you very uncomfortable. Okay, so let's talk about best practices. Before we get into role design, let's get back to talking about the application implementation type roles. Okay, and there's a few of them. There's application implementation manager and consultant and that kind of thing. Now, this is a kind of ties into a battle that we've been having with organizations for a long time, and maybe you can agree with this. I know it causes a lot of arguments, but it's this idea of, once we're live, how do we support our production environments? Okay. And what that means is, let's assume worst case scenario, we're a 24/7 shop and we have an issue at 3 a.m. in production and it's year end. Okay. And everybody's running around trying to get the books closed. The obvious answer and the traditional answer is we need, subject matter experts, support people who can access the application, reproduce the issue, find what's going on, whatever the support process is, right? But what we don't want to have to worry about is at 3 a.m. is asking a security administrator to give us access to the app in order to go in, fix this issue, and get everything back up and running. Okay. Again, throughout all the applications, from JD Edwards, NetSuite has it. There's these kind of power roles that give a user access to everything, and that, from a support perspective, that's the easiest thing to do. Okay, because then I don't have to worry about delays in getting production back up and running. Now, in Oracle Cloud, there's these application implementation roles that give the user access to everything, and they're wonderful for getting, as it says, the application implemented. Okay, they're wonderful for getting you up and running. You get, while you're in a non-live you can get access to everything, check out, as you're developing, building, configuring, make sure the application is doing what you're expecting it to. And the idea is, and even Oracle say this, is at the end, when you go live, you should deassign these roles from users and really not use them. But it comes back to this idea of, yeah, but what if we have a problem? Now, there's all sorts of ways around this, and we actually have a white paper on it. You have a few options, and I will summarize them for time. Use an identity management solution. Too many organizations are using generic IDs that are shared by users who then have these roles, right? So how are you going to be accountable? How are you going to make these users accountable if they're sharing user accounts? So use your identity management solution to provision and use that break glass approach, okay? The other approach is to keep the accounts locked. Have service personnel, but keep their accounts locked. When an issue comes up, have a ticket, open the account, make sure they do the job, update the ticket, close it. That's gonna reduce your risk exposure. Alternatively, the longer approach is to remove these roles, and when there's an issue, as a support user, assign them the roles that they need to recreate the issue and sign in. That does introduce more time. If you're looking at this as balancing the scales between support and security, that one creates more, that one needs more time to do. But from a security perspective, you're much better off because you're, again, limiting the exposure that this user can do. The issue that we see time and time again is that these subject matter experts, they know the application, they know the process, they're being allowed access to production, and they have access to configuration and transactions, caveat without workflow approval, of course. And they can do what they want. If we hear about it. If they're upset, they can, on the last day, screw the system up. If they want to defraud you, they have the ability to create and approve those transactions, set up those transactions, or reroute those transactions because they know how to do it. So we spend a lot of time securing end users and kind of skipping over these sysadmins and these power users because there's this fear that if we try and secure them, we're going to somehow impact our ability to do business as usual. And especially at the moment with us all working remotely, accountability is even more important. So again, it's a conversation that we're having over and over again. But if you're struggling with this and you don't quite know what to do, perhaps you're having an argument with your management team about the need for security, let us know. There's been we've been through this quite a number of times with organizations. There are a number of options that you can kind of satisfy or try and satisfy everyone in this argument. But our recommendation, if we're looking at this from a security standpoint, is remove these power roles. Okay, users do not need 24/7 access to everything in the application. Okay, so yeah, it's fairly obvious. Move to custom roles, right? Copy and create new roles. As a result, they don't get updated by Oracle updates. Those ORA roles, you kind of want to disperse. Unless you can identify that they're, low risk, something fairly basic. But ideally, spend the time to do custom roles. Now, sadly, this does kind of fly in the face of a lot of implementations, and this idea of implementing the application quickly and cheaply, spending more time on security, kind of flies in the face of that. It's more work, it's more effort. It can be more costly, especially if you're using a systems integrator, and therefore that's going to have an impact on our go live. But what you have to consider, and what management has to consider, is at some point you're going to have to go back and revisit your security, whether it's an audit, whether it's fraud or error, whatever the reason may be. And it's usually between 12 and 24 months after go live, sometimes seen it quicker. Organizations come back and say, okay, we went live, we checked the box of getting it in on time and in budget, but now security is a mess. And the issue at that point is, I haven't found any organization that has the appetite to completely redo their security. Now you're in firefighting mode, right? Which is, let's identify all the biggest issues and then try and fix them. Try and argue with the business, the accounts team and the treasury team and payroll and that kind of thing, that, their users have too much access and they're trying to do their job on a day-to-day basis and they don't want to deal with security because it's out of their scope. And the argument just goes on and on. And at that point, restructuring security or trying to get security and compliance becomes much slower, much more labor intensive, and much more costly, depending, of course, on how bad your security is. But by this point, 2020, and with this audience, I'm sure enough of you at this point can see this argument and have been through it. I don't know what the answer is. As a company, as I say, we have a role design solution. Maybe that kind of approach of having a predefined security model that's custom made might work for you. If it does, get in touch. But there is an ROI to doing security, and if you're in that planning phase, try and build in this idea that a good security model, not just securing your assets and your data and so on, is actually going to have good payback in the long run. Okay, so auditing, fairly obvious one, this one. I'm not talking about external audits or people. I'm talking about the auditing in the application. And given time, we're going to have to skip through this fairly quickly. But the nice thing in Oracle Cloud Applications is that the auditing can be configured, I'd say, by pretty much anyone. You don't need a computer science degree to go on the back end of the Oracle database and set up that kind of thing like you have to in on-prem applications, right? All the worries about performance and storage and that kind of thing. Of course, this is cloud. We don't have to worry about performance and all that kind of thing anymore because Oracle take care of it. If we want to audit key aspects of the application, which we can, then Oracle should take care of it. And that's from a security standpoint, that's one of the wonderful things about moving to the cloud, is that you get to take advantage of some of this functionality, which for a long time has been desired by companies running EBS and PeopleSoft and so on. But that argument of what's the impact on performance and storage has always led it to be a very complex subject. And as a result, auditing rarely gets put in place. So as I say, in cloud, you have this ability to manage audit policies, where you can choose business objects. The one that we're looking at here is the Oracle Platform Security Services. And you get to kind of choose the events. So as we go through this, what we're going to look for in this screen here is, we want to audit role membership changes. Okay, so where roles are created, deleted, or membership adds. So in other words, when a role is assigned to a user, and then also when it's removed. Okay. Now, even if we were worried about performance in a live environment, this is not going to be suffering from huge changes and huge volumes of data, right? So, logically, this is available to you. Really recommend that you use it over security, right? Especially if you can't segregate the security functions. So one of the rules that we have in our SOD tool is we look for people who can create users, create and maintain users, and create and maintain roles, right? Because the worry is I could set myself up as a dummy user and assign myself to all the roles needed to complete transactions, like, create myself as a supplier, approve that supplier, and start paying myself. Okay, logically, the process of creating users and managing roles should be separated from each other. But given some organizations are not big enough to warrant having, the security function split in two, or maybe you only have one security person. So then the flip side is probably we should switch on auditing, right? And then just review and analyze the reports to say, did our security officer make any changes to themselves over the last month? Okay. So again, I highly recommend you using this. There's really, I don't know of any downside to not to using it. So yeah, a good thing to have. So as I say, you have the ability to audit role membership. and also the ability to audit privilege membership. So you can get down to that level as well. So, in that report, you can start identifying key privileges and kind of keeping an eye on those in terms of their membership and assignment. Okay, so that's drawing us out. Roughly 10 minutes left. I will leave the session open for questions. I'd say this was purely education. I don't want to, do a demo of what we do or anything like that. But if anything resonates with what we've talked about today, we do have a solution around Role Design Studio. We've kind of created a studio where we've built a library of controls and roles outside of the application. So these are custom roles with all the key pieces of functionality, and they are ready to import. We actually use that import functionality I talked about before, where we can import these roles into your environment and you start using them. Whether you import them into your non-prod or prod environment is up to you. But as I say, we have a service here where we can build take a role library and build it to your requirements. Not only that, we actually can perform an SOD scan over those roles and highlight, whether roles have any SOD issues in them, or if those roles are giving access to sensitive data, that kind of thing. Okay, so it's kind of like a role design, security design out of the box, and we work with you. And if you're a systems integrator or a risk-based consultancy, we can work with you as well to try and get with this idea that security should be considered from the start rather than thought. Now, if you're interested in that, we are actually doing an offer where we have 4 free roles, and we'll actually help import them as well for you to work with in testing. So they're 4 roles, but they're actually around 2 areas. One is auditing. So one role allows you to do audit configuration, and the other one allows you to do audit reporting. So we've separated that process, okay? And then I've left out, for some reason, the reporting bit on security has disappeared, but security configuration from, security configuration from security reporting is also separated as well. Okay, so we've actually separated out these processes. I'll update that slide. I missed that one. But they are available for free to give you a taster of the Role Design Studio. Now, that's all in terms of content today. We do have a YouTube channel. We have a LinkedIn page. You can also connect with me, Lewis Hopkins. Website, securing.com/ERP-cloud. That's what we're calling it there. And you can also reach out to me personally, Lewis, Lewis, @securing.com, SEE, instead of SE, securing.com. And I'd be more than happy to answer your questions or help you with any role design issues that you have. I would encourage you to, to keep in touch, because, as I say, we're going to be running more of these sessions as we go forward, getting into more of the details around the application. If you want to kind of co-present on any of this, again, reach out if you've learned something around this that we haven't established. Reach out. Always happy to co-present and bring out these topics. Education is the best step forward to helping people not fall foul of errors and issues and so on. But other than that, I want to thank you very much for attending. I will look at the chat now. First question, will you share the presentation? Yeah, we can share the presentation. They should have recorded as well. We're also running it again next Wednesday. I think it's an hour later than what we have now, but we are going to be running it again. And I think the idea is, just to be running these consistently, because there's a lot of nuances and little gotchas that we're finding in cloud, such as that role delegations item we talked about earlier. Also check out our partner ERP Risk Advisors. They're putting out a lot of content, and that's content that we're working with them on as well. So there's lots of videos around some of these issues, and they're also finding bugs as well, which is very helpful. Okay, next question. Are all roles predefined with ORA? There are certain roles that are not do not start with the short code ORA, and this is where it gets confusing. And it's why I come back to the point: if you are and you should be creating your own roles, is getting the discipline of using your own short code. Okay, so figure out 3 characters that you can use at the start and use them. Working with customers that have done that, they've been very successful in their reporting, and it's very easy when they're looking at their reports to identify roles that they haven't defined versus what they have. And so when they start to see, a role that doesn't have their short code assigned to a user, they know that that's something that's coming from Oracle or some third party that's got some kind of integration. So they've got a very clean security reporting structure. For those that haven't done it, I will say that they do regret it, because, like I say, they're unsure based on people using all sorts of different short codes, what they've built and what's from someone else. Because again, the role name can be duplicated, but the role code can't. Okay, and so where you've got a lot of roles sharing the same name, and it happens, you have to rely on the role code because that's the one thing that is distinct. Okay. Is the session being recorded? Yeah, as I say, the session is being recorded, and you can get a copy of the slides as well. Next question. Let's have a look through here. Okay, how many seeded roles are there? That's a good question. The thing is, it changes with each release. So new roles are brought in. Sometimes old roles are taken out. It's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. I can tell you that we just did a recent scan on a customer running 20B, and like I say, they were just short of 9,000 privileges that were available to be assigned. And I would argue that is something that you should keep tabs on more than the role count, simply because, as I say, sometimes you can be assigning privileges to users that's opening up functionality that you're not licensed for. You do need to think about that. You do need to put in place controls, around between like the teams that implement your functionality and security, because of the licensing issues, right? There's no warnings or stops that tell you, hey, you're about to go over your license count, or hey, you're about to start using something you're not licensed for. Okay, you do need to kind of educate your team, your organization around this approach, and develop a strategy as to how you're going to manage this going forward. So yeah, I'll see if there's a way of looking at all the seeded roles. I'm sure there is. I could do a count off an environment, see how many seeded roles are in there, group it all together. But as I say, I'm not entirely sure what the actual number is. There's a lot, and there's a lot of roles in there that have SOD issues. So perhaps we'll share that in a later presentation. But look, again, I think I'll draw it to a close there. Give you back a few more minutes on your day, and I want to thank you very much again for attending. We'll be running it again next Wednesday. So if you have team members or associates that you think would benefit, point them our way, and we'll run it again for those individuals. And look out for more sessions in the future. So I want to thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to hosting you on the next session. Bye for now.